It was an early morning for me. I recently got laid off my job of 8 years and it was difficult to find a job at the time. I settled for working for a food delivery company and I was making anywhere from $5 to $18 per hour. The delivery company was offering to pay an extra $3 that morning and I decided to go out at 2:30 a.m. After a few orders, I decided to head home. As I pulled up the driveway, I could see someone digging in the garbage. The lights to my car didn't bother this person at all. They continued to dig. I honked my horn, and this disgusting, dirty, homeless-looking man looked up at me and gave me the meanest glare I'd ever seen. I rolled down my window and yelled at him to leave. He stared at me for what felt like 5 minutes, but in reality it was only 5 seconds. I honked at him again. He looked up at me, but this time with a smile. His teeth, or what was left of them, were this dark yellow color. I was frozen in my seat. I reached into my glove box to grab my pepper spray and immediately remembered I left it in my pants pocket from the night before. I didn't realize it, but the homeless man had turned to face my car. He was massive. He stood at least 6'5". Even though he was extremely thin, he had an intimidating presence. He had one hand behind his back and had an empty garbage bag in the other. I will never forget what he did and said next. He pulled a machete from behind his back and said to me, "I'll be putting you in here after I cut you up with this." I locked my car and laid on the horn to get as much attention as possible. The homeless man started walking to my driver's side door, and just then, my brother, who had been letting me stay with him, and his family while I got back on my feet, and who also happens to be a former Marine, opened the side door to the house and aimed a shotgun at the homeless man. This was the first time I had seen the man stop smiling. "Get the F out of here before I blow your brains out." The homeless man stood there, looked over at me and winked. My brother warned him again to leave as he loaded one into the chamber. The homeless man ran off. Just like that, my nightmarish experience was over. I'm even more grateful now for my brother than ever. He has saved me more times than I can think of. I know this story doesn't sound realistic, but the fear that I felt that night was extremely real. And a lot of you are probably going to say, why didn't I call the cops or hit the homeless man with my car? Well, if you're ever in this position, or if you're ever getting threatened by a homeless man with a machete, it's kind of difficult to think when you're frozen by fear. Last year I was going out for drinks with my friends, but since I had to go to uni the next day, I only stayed around until midnight. My boyfriend promised to pick me up and go home with me because I don't like to take the subway alone at night, but since I was pretty drunk by then, I took a little too long walking out of the pub. Unfortunately, we had to wait for the night bus, since the subway closes on the weekdays at night. For context, my boyfriend and I don't live together, but very close to each other, around 15 to 20 minutes walking distance. Both areas are pretty bad. He lives near a train station, many crackheads, homeless, and sketchy people around. And I live in a cheap, bad district with a high crime rate. My building has 2 entrances on 2 different streets, because it is a corner building site leading to a patio, and then to the apartment building and its doors. To get into my apartment, I have to open 3 doors. I usually use the entrance that is nearer to the subway and on the side of my apartment. We had to take 2 buses to go home. One drove us to the train station and the next one from the train station to my apartment. After getting out of the first bus, we realized that we would have to wait for around 20 minutes or something for the second bus to come, and since I really had to sleep at home, I didn't want to stay at his place. My boyfriend didn't want to wait to persuade me to walk instead of taking the bus, which sober me would have never done, but since I was still drunk, I didn't care how we got home, so I agreed. We started to walk home and passed a few sketchy people, mostly people selling drugs, etc., but nothing really bad. Then I saw a guy walking in our direction and I somehow got a bad feeling. So I told my boyfriend that I wanted to change to the other side of the street because I didn't want to walk past him. Suddenly the guy yelled, "Hey!" as if he wanted to ask us something, but we ignored it and continued to walk. He got louder and louder until he started to yell. I could see from the corner of my eye that he was coming over, so I whispered, "Run," to my boyfriend. Took his hand and ran the fastest I could while he was chasing us. We ran and ran and ran and then made a turn to the right and hid. It seemed like he was gone, so I took my keys out and we started running towards my building, taking the other entrance of my building that I normally didn't use. As I was trying to open the door, my boyfriend started panicking, throwing me inside the patio and closing the door aggressively, and then pushing me to the building. He explained that the guy came running from the other side of the street, meaning he took a shortcut, probably thinking we were going to run to the subway. If we had taken the other entrance, he would have been clearly the faster one. Being in shock, we unfortunately didn't call the police, which I regret. I stopped going out clubbing for half a year after this, and slept at my boyfriend's place for 2 weeks because I was scared he would come back. I think the worst part about this is that he really wanted to get us for whatever reason. I still wanted to know why he chased us for so long. 2 weeks later, a girl a few streets away was raped in front of her building by a guy who chased her home. I wonder if this was the same guy or just a coincidence. I was almost a victim of a snuff film. I used to work at a video rental place back when they still existed. A man came in with his son and started to scan our inventory. He tried to make small talk with me and introduced himself as Paul. I introduced myself as well, but when I tried to introduce myself to Paul's son, he seemed scared and standoffish. Paul asked me how old I was and I told him I was 16. He laughed, remarking how much fun he had back when he was my age. He asked if I was looking to make some extra money because he needed someone to do his yard work. I jumped at the idea since I needed the money to buy my first car. I met up with Paul the following day at around 2 and began to mow his lawn. After a couple hours, Paul walked out and asked me if I wanted to take a break. I said sure, and he handed me a bottle of water. I asked Paul where his son was, and he replied, "He's in his room. He knows better than to come out when company is over." I opened the water and noticed the seal was already broken. Paul looked at me, expecting me to take a sip, and I took a sip in order to get him to stop staring at me. It tasted weird. Not like Arrowhead water weird, but just metallic. When he turned away, I spit the water back into the bottle. He asked me to help him with something in the basement, and red flags started to go off. I told him I had to leave, but he insisted I help him. He also offered to pay me an extra $100 if I helped him move some boxes around in the basement. In the chance he wasn't a complete creep, I accepted, and he led me to the basement door. He had me walk in first, and as I was walking down the steps, I tripped over a wire he had set up halfway down the stairs. I rolled down the stairs and hit my head against the wall. I was half conscious when I saw him staring at me from the top of the stairs. His creepy smile was gone, and all I could see was his horrifying smug face. He slammed the door shut and locked it. I ran up the stairs and banged on the door, yelling at him to let me out. I could hear him walk away. I was scared. There was only a small window in the basement, and I couldn't reach it. Eventually my exhaustion won and I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning to a sandwich and a water next to me, and a note that said, "Good boys eat, bad boys starve. Which will you be?" I felt disgusted and kicked the sandwich away. I had lost all hope of getting saved. Out of boredom, I began to do some snooping. I noticed a box tucked in the corner under the stairs. Out of curiosity, I walked over to it and was met with a large collection of video cassette tapes. All of them had a sticker on the side with the names of boys. I thought it was strange, and it didn't make sense to me. Out of nowhere, I heard a car turn on and leave. It was Paul. I wanted to take this as an opportunity to try to escape, but then I heard the basement door open. It was Paul's son. I asked him to help me, and he told me I only had a few minutes to escape before his dad returned. I thanked him, and I'll admit I hugged him. He told me to hurry, but I remember those cassette tapes. Something in me told me to run back down and grab one. I thanked the boy and ran out of the door. It felt like it had been years since I felt fresh air. When I got home, my parents were relieved to see me and told me they were worried sick. They had the police searching for me. I told them to call the police and to have them come over. I told them everything that happened and showed them the tape I had taken. The police came by, and both them and my parents were shocked by what I told them. My parents were upset that I didn't tell them my whereabouts before meeting up with Paul. I didn't find these next details out until several years later. My parents told me that the man that had abducted me was a pedophile, and the boy that was with him wasn't his biological son. Paul had bought the boy off a homeless tweaker in exchange for drugs. My parents couldn't find the words to describe the following details. I read the report the police officers gave to my parents. The video I gave to the officers was a snuff film. Paul would do awful things to these children before they met their demise. He even had the audacity to record it on video. Paul, whose real name was Charles, was arrested and sentenced to life in prison for his crimes. I don't know what came of his quote son, but I'm thankful he saved my life. The boy in the tape I gave the police was named Ricky. It haunts me to know that Ricky wasn't Charles' only victim. He had a whole box full.